Okairi, welcome back to my channel, Maybe Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we have an extremely exciting interview. All of them are, but this one particularly because it's a collaboration between myself, Chelsea from a not-so-secret Bookaholic, and Mihir from Fantasy Book Critic, who brought us all together to interview the legend, Rob J. Hayes.
Oh, man,
we are
that's
here
an
to
introduction I'm not sure I
celebrate
can live
a
up to.
decade. I think you can, because we're here to celebrate a decade of you putting books out into the world. So I know it's a big question to start with, but in general, do you have thoughts on your long journey of writing for a decade, 20 plus books? How are you feeling?
Terrified. Every new release terrifies me all over again. So even with I'm now, this is actually my 11th year, and I've got 19 books published. But by the end of this year, I'll have 23 published because I'm being a maniac and I'm releasing 4 books in 1 year. And every single new release is just as terrifying as the last. It never gets better. It's just like every time you're putting out like this book baby into the world, and you're just hoping that people like it, and you always have the exact same fears of, oh, what if they don't? So yeah, that just never goes away. So yeah, I'm terrified because I'm gearing up to release another book. But generally, I'm incredibly sort of happy and you know that I've managed to make this into a career. That, you know, I could, this is what I love to do, and I'm getting to do it, and yeah. So yeah, really happy generally.
I'd argue the fact that it terrifies you means you care the proper amount, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's just it. It's like you spend so much sort of like time and effort, you put so much into a book that I think that if you're sort of like, if you're putting it out and you don't care what anybody thinks, then you're probably not really doing it right. I don't know, but for me, I certainly still do. And gearing up to release the Eater Saga it's on the same level of when I was gearing up to release the War Eternal books. I was in such a state of utter fear, terror, just worry, anxiety, because I was just so desperate for everyone to like them, and hopefully they will. They certainly did with the War Eternal, so fingers crossed.
So you started off as an indie writer, self-publishing, which is amazing to begin with. Anyways, publishing in any way I find so inspirational, because writing a book in general, just that terrifies me, let alone the rest of it that comes with it. Looking back though, what do you think of the whole indie scene back then?
It was an entirely different beast when I first started. There's a few of us who sort of like back then in sort of 2013, there's a few of us who were publishing at the same sort of time. There was sort of like me and Bengali, and we sort of lovingly refer it to as the gold rush, because back then Amazon was doing a lot of the heavy lifting because they were still trying to establish the platform themselves. So they would sort of like they'd actively push books to potential readers. So as long as you were sort of like, you know, publishing something that was, you know, I guess, decent quality, Amazon would do a lot of the heavy lifting and getting it to other people, which is part of why Ties That Bind did so incredibly well straight off the bat. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea. I was like, I don't know, I'll release a book, I'll spam social media, see how it goes. But luckily Amazon picked up a lot of the slack. Whereas these days, they obviously don't do that. So it's a completely different beast from what it was sort of 10, 11 years ago to what it is now. In some ways, I would say it's kind of harder now than it was back then, even though I would say the readership now, because the people who are actually consuming indie books is a lot higher these days. So yeah.
There are whole channels on BookTube and Twitter and all sorts dedicated to just indie books. I know myself, I try and push indie books as much as possible, and then obviously you read traditionally published as well. So that's really interesting, actually. Do you wish that it was, or let me rephrase that. Do you wish that it now, the way that publishing is now for indie, do you wish it would kind of go back to how it was, or do you think, although it is a little bit harder now, do you think it's better in a way?
I think it would be lovely if it did go back to that sort of way where it's like Amazon's, helping you push it. But the problem is there were a lot fewer books being published back then, and a lot fewer books already out back then, obviously, as well. I don't think that they could do it the same way that they used to do it then, for the simple fact that, I mean, the stats wise alone are like there's over 10,000 books being published a day or something like that. It's ridiculous, and that just didn't exist sort of 11 years ago. So I don't think that things would be in place for them to push as many books quite like that. So I think nowadays they tend to focus more on the ones that are already doing well and that people have already shown an interest in, which in some ways is probably the better way to do things, because it's like they are pushing the proven sellers to people, and especially if there's sort of thing where if you've looked at a book, they're more likely to then try and make you look at it again, which is great. That's a great way of doing things. But I think the problem is it's a hell of a lot harder for new writers to get started. I think for people like me who already have a readership, it's a lot easier these days to publish a book. Whereas if you're a complete unknown, it's really hard to get that sort of inertia ball started and just sort of like to start making a name for yourself. So I'm incredibly impressed by people these days who can actually do it. I mean, people like Brian Cahill, who came out of nowhere like 2 years ago and is suddenly just absolutely massive. So impressed by like what he's managed to achieve. But there's just for every one of like Ryan, there's sort of like 100 other authors who they're struggling to get even like one sale because they can't get the visibility. So in some ways it would be nicer if it was a bit like back then. So it's like the smaller authors can get that visibility, but at the same way, it just wouldn't work that way anymore.
Well, I would say also you clearly are taking steps though to help those authors. I know that you release a monthly, blog post with all of the up and coming releases, the specifically self-pub releases. So it's really nice to see people who, like you, have become, a titan of the genre or of the world of self-publishing, to be able to, help those people who are coming out now, because it's not their fault that they missed the gold rush, right? So I think, I just want to point out that you are doing, I think it's great that you're doing things to help people who are coming out now.
Thank you. It's kind of like, I remember Mark Lawrence saying one time, part of the reason he started Swiftbow is because there was a bit of sort of like survivor's guilt in the, he managed to sort of like, he got himself a publishing deal, and he managed to get up there, and he's now got this readership, and he felt, like the bit of survivor's guilt for all these people who are still struggling. And I guess I kind of feel the same sort of way, like there's so many people who don't have a readership. So if I can help get their books in front of people who, if people know me, they are probably readers of indie fantasy already. So there's a much better chance of them being like, oh yeah, I'll give another indie a shot. So yeah, anything I can do to help provide a bit of extra visibility to up and comers is I'll try it.
I think that's really helpful as well, because I think sometimes as an outsider looking in, it can seem as though it feels like a competition, who you see people posting on Twitter all the time, and I understand why they do it, saying this is how many sales I've had this month or today or however it's done. And I can imagine that seeing that and seeing someone else has had 30 sales that day and you might not have had any, that can be a really big impact on you and your self-confidence and what you've actually put out there. So having someone as well established as yourself recommending and promoting other up and coming indie authors, that must really help them out and make them feel valued as well, which is an incredible thing to do.
I hope so. I mean, one of the major reasons I did actually start doing it, and the way that I do it is because I remember sort of, I don't know what it was, like 6 years ago, I used to see these like monthly release lists from like they'd be posted on Tor, I think it was like Tor.com or whatever, and the Barnes and Noble blog back when that was still a thing. And I remember thinking, oh, wouldn't it be nice if my book was on that? And it was like every time you just think, oh, I'm releasing a book, I'll just check to see if they know about it. And it never was, obviously. And I just thought, yeah, wouldn't it be nice if it was? So I thought, well, instead of waiting, hoping that one of these big publishers sort of like starts noticing indie and goes, how about I just start doing it myself? And yeah, it turns out people quite like hearing about the books that are coming out. And there's a lot of people that they don't know that a book like these books are coming. So they sort of like, yeah, they'll go onto my webpage and they'll be like, oh yeah, I found 2 new books this month to read, which is great.
It does kind of help, like Rob, you're mentioning, because the whole, Amazon doesn't really push and there's like a deluge of new authors. At least there's a place for for the authors themselves to list it, like, on your blog, and for readers like us to be like, okay, there's something interesting. And we can just be like, okay, maybe not even this month, we can look in the past months as well. So it's always helpful. Like, just even if it's posted over there, it is helpful because somebody can still go back and look at it as well. So it's always going to be there no matter what. So that's a huge, huge, huge help.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, unless my website dies, which occasionally it does, usually when I try to update it and it all goes horribly wrong, and I immediately jump on the phone to my sister and go, help, I've broken it again.
I'm sure she looks forward to those calls every single time.
Yeah.
But I think it's also great as well because, like Mio just said, you can look back and find other things, but because there are so many things coming out all the time, finding something that you want to read or something that you haven't actually heard of can be quite difficult. I mean, sometimes I am quite lucky and I get people reach out to me directly and say, can you read my book, or this is what I'm releasing, are you interested in it? And that's fantastic because that's another way to obviously find these things. But at the same time, finding it yourself is like it's when you find your own next favorite book, it's like a little spark of, I don't know, something joyous and sparkly.
No, I
think
completely
sparkle
agree.
is a perfect way to put it. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And while we're talking about publishing, last time when I had the pleasure to talk to you on Page Twoing, we talked a lot about how you are, here actually coined this, but a nomadic author, your nomadic writing style. You go from genre to genre. And we talked about how you're able to bring your readership with you, which I think is just a talent in and of itself. But not only do you play with the genres that you write, but you also play with the way that you publish books. So I know back in the beginning, The Ties That Bind, I believe, is the one that you published in one go.
Yes.
Like all on the same day. And then you had said that you weren't sure you would ever do that again due to the stress. And yet here we are with God Eater with a rapid release again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the God Eater thing's a little bit
how you decide.
different. Because of sort of like kickstarted the God Eater, that just made sort of sense to release them close together but stagger them, because it's like all 3 book ones being released close together, especially as the way that I'm writing and releasing that series is writing it concurrently to also release it concurrently. So a trilogy of trilogies being written and published concurrently. There's a tagline that I've memorized a little bit. So that made sense to sort of like release them very close together. But yes, after releasing all 3 Ties That Bind books on the same day, and then for The War Eternal, I released books 1, 2, and 3 1 month apart. And then decided that I should never do a rapid release again because it's so much more effort than just releasing 1 book. But apparently I don't listen to myself, so I just keep doing stupid things.
Can I ask what makes you decide to go for a rapid release? Is there some kind of benefit or something that you like that it does for your readership, which is why you tend to lean towards that? Or is there a reason that you tend to do that?
The readers certainly do like it, especially if it's if you're releasing an entire series, like I did with The War Eternal, sort of 1 month apart, because readers, like watchers, most people these days, they like to binge things. We are part of the binge culture at the moment. So people, they read the first book and they want the second one. They don't want to have to wait. And then, especially in the fantasy community as well, there's a bit of a stigma against series that are ongoing, thanks to a couple of authors who may be dragging their heels over some very big books that they're supposed to be releasing. So readers definitely like to know that a series is going to be finished. So if you can say, hey, this series will be finished and published next month, it can be a big draw to potential readers. But on the sort of business side of things, there's also the fact that Amazon as a platform likes to push new releases. And when it comes to series, when you say publish book 2, it means that they'll push book one again because they're trying to get in new readers as well as getting the book two to existing readers. So then if you're rapid releasing, you're basically, I say sort of gaming the system, but it's not really gaming the system. It's just using the system as it is to keep a series in sort of like the limelight, as it were, for 3 months, maybe, instead of 1 month, if that's how it actually works. I don't know the actual dates, but so in that sort of sense, it's giving it more time to fight against that inertia and get the ball rolling to the point where it becomes sort of self-sustaining without Amazon having to give it that extra push of here's a new release.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I did The War Eternal, because Ben Galley had recently rapid released the Chasing Graves trilogy, I think it was.
Chasing Graves.
Yeah, he said like it did like a lot to help push the visibility of the series. So I thought, yeah, sure, I've got a series, a trilogy that I've written that I'm hoping to publish soon. I can do that. And I both thank him and hate him for it, because oh my god, it was so much work.
You did something different though than Ben's rapid release. He rapid released it at a time with normal times. You rapid release it literally at the start of the global pandemic. So that's something.
Oh yeah, the pandemic certainly helped. People were like, I remember when it first started, and there was a lot of people saying sort of like, oh no, reading is going to crash because people haven't got money to spend on luxury items anymore. No, people were reading so much more during the pandemic. Like, whew, it was brilliant. Can we have another lockdown? We don't need another pandemic, but let's just have another lockdown. That was great.
Well, to be fair, the lockdown was what made me join this amazing community, to be honest. Did you find that the lockdown helped or hindered your actual writing process? I know that kind of being locked in a house is a lovely idea and concept, but sometimes when you have to stare at the same four walls, that can possibly dampen your creativity. Did you find that?
No, it was a weird time for me because I'd spent about 5 months or so getting The War Eternal ready to publish. By the time I think it was sort of May when I released the final book, I think, or something like that. I hadn't written any new work for like 5 months at that point. So like creative juices was just like, write something. So no, the lockdown really helped me. I sat down and I wrote like 200,000 books in 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah, it was quite nice. And then, I'd go for a run, there'd be no one on the streets, and I'd be like, I don't have to dodge around people. It's great. I can just think about what I'm going to write next.
My brain capacity is free to just think.
Exactly. It was great.
So what I'm hearing is Brando Sando isn't the only one who wrote a bunch of secret projects, basically, during that time.
Actually,
Sounds
yeah,
like
I have a book which I wrote during the pandemic, which I still haven't published yet. It's the first in a series, which one day I'm going to publish, but it's finding the schedule to actually get it out, and then also get the sequels to that written, which when you're sort of like, I'll write a trilogy of trilogies, it really messes up your schedule. So one day that will come out. But at the moment, yeah, that's still like a secret project just sitting on the side. Apart from here, he's read it because he's lucky.
I was going to ask you if that was the thing which you're referring to, the horror fantasy, right?
Yeah. Yes. That's it was sort of like, I think I'd been watching a lot of Alien and The Thing and stuff like that. So I decided, let's write a sort of horror fantasy with a bit of matchlock fantasy thrown in there, and it was weird, but apparently it's quite a good book.
Is that your only unpublished book, or have you got more sat in the wings?
That's my only unpublished one, which will one day be published. I do have a few books which are unpublished because they're crap.
And is that just your thought process, or have you let other people vet this too? Because I'd volunteer to give you some thoughts if you want.
I do let other people read them, and if people come back and say, hey, that was brilliant, I'd be like, sure. But if I'm sitting there thinking this book is crap, and then I throw it to some alpha readers and they say this book is crap, then the book's crap.
Are those books which you said, which they supposedly are crap, are they before these books or after these books? Did you write them before or after?
Well, there's a leading question from someone who knows. Yes, Mahir, it is before. One of those books is the first book I ever wrote in the First Earth Saga. It was before I knew what I was doing with writing. It's before I found my own voice. And it shows it's just not a very good book, and it's too much trying to be Game of Thrones and failing. So
you mentioned
that does kind of.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Chelsea.
No, it's
Take
fine.
it away.
I was just going to say, you just mentioned that you had the idea of your schedule, and it got all muddled. How do you plan your schedule?
I try to plan it so like I try to plan it so I'm writing a book and then I give it sort of like a year or so before I release it. So I usually I'm working, if I'm publishing book one, I've already working on book two, or book two's already maybe finished or something. So that was kind of the plan. But yeah, it worked for a long time, up until sort of 2022, I think. Basically, it was when I started releasing books like The War Eternal. It completely messed up the schedule because I was releasing too many books to the point where I caught up with myself. And now with turning the God Eater Saga into a trilogy of trilogies, I've done it again. So I'm sort of, I've caught up with myself again, basically. So yeah, by the end of this year, I'll have published another 4 books, and that'll be pretty much everything apart from the secret project thing. And then it's sort of like, okay, take a year to start working on the next books. I would like to get back to my original schedule, actually. That would be lovely, but it's hard to get back into once you've broken it.
Life doesn't allow for that quite often, does it? But I was going to kind of go in a chronological order here through your career, but we've talked about the God Eater Saga quite a few times now. And I feel like I have to ask, you call it a trilogy of trilogies. For those who don't know what that means, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, but that means that you are releasing the first book in each trilogy first.
Yes.
And then it'll be the second book in each trilogy, and then the third book, which I have never seen before. So while we're talking about different publishing ideas, where did this come from? Where in the ether did you get the idea you were going to do that to yourself? Because that sounds, as a writing exercise, even in and of itself, extremely difficult. Like, I can't conceptualize how you would outline that. So I'm wondering why that's the route you decided to go with this.
Yeah. So I started writing The God Eater back in 2018, I think it was. Or maybe I finished the first book in 2018. I don't know. It's been a while. And I used that first book to get myself an agent who tried to sell it to Trad. Trad didn't want it because they've been moving away from epic fantasy for a while, basically. So it's sort of like it just sat there for a year, and then I kept going back to it and working on it and making it bigger and bigger and bigger and adding more to the world. And the lore behind it and everything. And then sort of when I decided back in 2022 that I was going to self-publish it, I took it back from my agent and just said, no, I'm just going to self-publish this now. By that time, it was already a hell of a lot bigger than it had been. And I had some ideas for the sort of like the past, sort of events in the past, which I was originally going to just sort of mention in the main series, in the trilogy, and then I started to realize that they were probably a bit too big to just be mentioned as, hey, this happened, and I realized that they could probably be written as their own stories. So I wrote the first one, which it turned into Demon, which is the 3,000 years prior to Herald story. And I just thought, okay, this is going to be a novella. And then it went bigger than a novella. It turned into a short novel. And then I finished that, and I was umming and ahhing thinking, well, I've got this other part of the sort of like of the world, part of the history of the world that I could really turn into another novella. But then that would be releasing 3 trilogies. And I really didn't want to do that. And I told my wife about it, and she just looked at me and said, do it. So I did it. So it's all her fault. But it's turned out to be, yeah, it's an exercise, and keeping it all in my head is not particularly easy. I'm not one for making notes, so most of it is all just up here, which is a bit of a headache at times. I don't know how I do it either.
Because if I'm not wrong, Rob, you're covering like a 4,000 year period, right? Like the Herald is set in the now, Demon is set in 3,000 years before Herald, and then Deathless is set 1,000 years before Herald, but 2,000 years after Demon, right?
Yep.
Wow.
And each one covers a major part in the world's history and that's helped shape where things are in Herald, basically. So while each of the trilogies will stand alone, you could just read them on their own. Each one will add to the understanding of the world, the characters in it, and how things have got to where they are, basically, which is in a bit of a state where Herald is.
Plus Angels. I have not heard of that in epic fantasy in probably never.
Yeah, there's a few, but not as many as you might think. Like there's Angels in John Gwynn's series, The Faithful and the Fallen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's some in Zamil Akhtar's Gunmetal Gods. Those are very biblical angels, all eyes and stuff. But
yes,
yeah, but they're not
nightmare creatures is more accurate.
Yeah.
And then there was a phase of YA angels at one point with quite a few
That's
series.
what I was gonna say. That's what I think of.
Yeah, Maximum Ride and the Fallen series. All books that I read when I was a teenager.
I think there's more in urban fantasy. I think you still get them in urban fantasy quite a bit, but not in
a little more paranormal, like less urban, more paranormal fantasy, or paranormal romance, so as to speak. Because there's a whole. I mean, angels have not always been there, but they've been there for like a long time, along with the werewolves, vampires, and all the exotic creatures with six-pack abs. Because it's paranormal.
Obviously. The ones that kind of blend into normal everyday life. When you look at them and you're like, you're just so alluring. That's obviously normal. Really not.
The allure is a prerequisite for being in the paranormal fantasy.
Yeah.
But something you did mention a little bit previously is you had pitched to TradPub, but they didn't quite want it. And I do know that you, while we've talked about self-pub is kind of where you live now, I know that you did have a foray into trad publishing that was not quite what you would hope. Unofficial audio
no, it was indie publishing.
Oh, it was indie publishing. Okay.
Yeah, I signed with a small press for a while with the Ties That Bind trilogy, and the press went down the drain. It was not a good time. There was all sorts of very unprofessional behavior, and in the end, they published an audiobook of my Best Laid Plans duology. They published the audiobooks before the ebooks had ever been edited. So they published them from an unedited manuscript, which I was very unpleased about, which was one of the many factors that led to me leaving them, which was a good time because they also went bankrupt about 2 months after I left them. So that did not go particularly well.
I wonder why.
Yeah, they did not run the business very well, and it showed.
Well, I guess just to have something positive come out of such an awful experience, do you have any advice for someone who might be looking for an indie press or publisher? Anything, and advice for someone or red flags to look out for when they're making such a big decision for their work?
Yeah, if you're going towards an indie press, be wary. Some of the red flags are if they're asking you for money, that's a no. the money flows towards the author, not away. But there are a lot of sort of, I think they're called vanity presses, where you'll pay them to publish your book, which that's not how it works. But there are a lot of indie presses these days which do really good work. Actually, there's like Athon Books. I might be pronouncing that wrong. There's Rafe Marked. There's a few others that do really well, and they actually produce quality products. But there's just as many that will just throw books out there. They'll give them the barest edit, a terrible cover, and they'll just throw them out there to die in the sea of books, basically. So I think the general gist is, if you're thinking of trying to get yourself indie published, the first thing you do is look at the other authors that are represented by the press, and maybe contact a few of them and ask, what's your experience with this publisher? Are they doing right by you? And most authors will be happy to chat with you and sort of give you some advice on specific that specific publisher. So if you contact someone and they say, no, they're not paying me on time, or they did terrible work publishing my book, marketing it, you can be like, maybe I'll just self-publish it instead.
That's a good option now, that people now, because I think vanity presses were so predatory in the past, or they kind of still are, because there was either trad publishing or vanity, and so that's why people whose books were so different that they knew that they would not be published with traditional publishing, they had to kind of go to vanity. But now, at least with indie publishing, there is that option of that you can do it on your own. You just, like you said, have to do a little bit of research.
Yeah. And I mean, doing it on your own these days with self-publishing is actually a hell of a lot easier. A lot of people say they can't afford it, but the reality is, there are companies which they specialize in creating covers for self-published fantasy nowadays, and they don't cost an arm and a leg. You might not get something as bespoke as if you're going to an artist and a designer and getting that sort of like that sort of bespoke artwork and design, but they'll give you something which is marketable at least, and professional looking. So it doesn't have to break the bank to self-publish these days, which is a really nice thing.
I kind of have a follow-up question on this, Rob, because based on your horrible experience with Ragnarok, but you still had another book which was Drones, I believe, which was your sci-fi thriller, right? You kind of published that with another. Was it a small press or was it an indie press? Because I'm not quite sure about that. How was that experience like?
That was an indie press. That was via Crossroads, and they were okay with it. They published it. They didn't tell me they were publishing it. They just kind of dropped out into the world and went, "Oh, by the way, your book's out." And I was like, "What? Okay." But in general, I took my book back from them because I didn't feel that they were doing anything with it, and I didn't have access to it to be able to sort of like put it on sale, do any sort of marketing buzz around it. So that's why I took it back from them. But yeah, they're one of those small presses that they do a decent enough job, but again, I don't feel like they were sort of like pushing the book at all. Whereas if you look at someone like Rafe Marked, they push their books to their readership. So they try to sell their new books to their existing readers, which I feel is a much better way of doing it. And they produce much sort of like higher quality products because of it as well.
Oh yeah, they have a very active reader base, but they also have great products because they get more readers because of that as well. Because every time anybody looks at their books, they're like, "Oh wow, I want to have a copy." So I can totally see that. Yeah, kudos to Rafe Marked.
Rafe Mark's Kickstarters. Listen, my wallet cannot. I'm gonna need them to stop. Basically, they're too.
I know. I've got a Sword of Gagan special edition sat on my bookshelf, and it's like, oh, it's so gorgeous.
That's how I felt when you released your Kickstarter for God Eater. I was like, I need them, but my wallet, but I need them. and luckily, the need won out, to be fair.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and going back,
you're not alone there, Chelsea. Exact same.
I know. me and my friend Lisa, there was a text conversation going, "Are you going to? But are you going to? But can you afford it? But it's not payday. But I'm doing it." you have to do. But going back just quickly to the God Eater Saga, and I'm not quite sure if you're ready to answer a question like this, but what is next for you after this release phase 1 of your God Eater Saga? Do you have that planned, or are you going on vacation?
No, there's no vacation for me this year because there's Glasgow 2024, the WorldCon. So that's my vacation for the year.
And now I feel left out because I'm guessing everyone else is going and I'm not.
It is never too late. Come join the party. For some reason, Glasgow became the place that everyone was going. So I was like, well, I was late to the party too.
And you don't even have to take a flight, Chelsea. You can literally take I'm guessing trains, right? There's like, you can take a flight, you can drive, you can take the trains. So
it's just so expensive.
Fair enough.
It is quite expensive, to be honest.
Even being based in the UK, so in the same landmass, it's trains in this country are ridiculous. Just
They are. That's an entirely different conversation this podcast is not ready for. But yes, no, I will be going to Glasgow. That is my vacation for the year, and I'll be going there for a slight business thing as well. You know, I'll be handing out some goodies for the God Eater Saga type thing. I've got some plans. Look, check this out. This is my satchel. I have a God Eater satchel made up for it, and it's going to be filled with goodies that I can hand out to people.
Oh, I can't wait to get my grubby little paws on those.
That does sound so cool.
So no vacation, but do you have a plan, or are you just kind of, this is where you're at right now?
This is like pretty much where I'm at. It turns out running a Kickstarter is incredibly stressful. And there's been a couple of delays with the printing, which has just added to the whole stress level. So I really want to get started on phase 2, the 3 book 2s. But I don't really have the headspace to get writing them at the moment. But they are certainly planned out in my head to a much larger degree than I have ever planned out any books in my life. So I know I'm very much a sort of some people call it a signpost type writer, or a flashlight type writer. I know, if you think of like writing a book as a journey, I know my destination and I know where I'm starting, and I know a few sort of like signposts along the way, but I only tend to see what's right in front of me, the chapter that's in front of me. But with the God Eater Saga, I have far more signposts than I ever have in any other book before. So hopefully that'll make the writing of it a lot smoother when I finally get around to getting started on phase 2.
So your comment there to me just baffles me, how you don't have what we discussed, me and my friend discussed on one of our conversations about a different series, a murder board, where you have like a board where all your characters are on it and all your plot points, and they've got bits of string and everything. How the heck do you keep all of that in your head?
I don't know. I wish I could tell. The only thing I can think of is there's all the space in my head is reserved for these crazy fantasy worlds that I like to dream up, which is why I don't remember anybody's birthdays or names or what I'm supposed to be doing tomorrow. I'm incredibly absent-minded, and I imagine that's why, because I'm always just up there instead.
I mean, for all of us, that's a benefit. Like, we just get these fantastic books for you, so we aren't complaining. I'm sure your family would not love that, but I want to get slightly to a different point, because you mentioned book planning, right? You mentioned that for the phase 2 sequels of God Eater, you're planning a lot because, of course, the whole timeline and everything. But I want to take you back to your career, because when you published the first Earth books, and especially the Ties That Bind, you had the Pirates duology and something like that. Not a lot of people know this, but you also released these fun comedic fantasy capers, the It Takes a Thief series of your books. I know you really like them and you really enjoyed them. Like, you enjoyed writing them a lot. Can you maybe talk a little bit about where that idea popped in? Because for a grimdark author to write a comedic fantasy about a cute couple who are in love with each other, and nothing terrible, or at least that much terrible happens, that was like a rapid departure for you, right?
Yeah. It was just I've always liked steampunk. And I love the idea of steampunk. It's so much fun. And yeah, I wrote the first chapter to It Takes a Thief, which is like this little heist that this couple are going on, just as a short story. And I enjoyed it so much. I had so much fun writing these two characters and this heist that they were going through, that I decided, you know what, I think I could turn this into a longer book. So that's what I decided to do. And it turns out it was a really terrible idea because nobody wanted it. So when I finally released it, I got a bunch of really negative reviews on it. People just saying, "What the hell is this? We wanted more First Earth books." And I was like, "Yeah, sorry, I'll get back to that at some point." But yeah, no, it was a massive departure, and it's just because I've always enjoyed just traveling through different genres. I don't want to write the same thing over and over and over and over again. So everything I write is just, it's new and it's different, because it's all just exploration for me as well.
Well, you just sold me on those books because I love heists and like comedy. I'm finding if it hits right in books, I'm really enjoying it at this current point in my reading career. So maybe
to
I'll
be
be
fair,
streaming
they're
about
not
the channel.
Comedy, they're humorous. I hate comedy in books. I absolutely hate it. I respect the hell out of Terry Pratchett. I love what he's done, but I hate the comedy, and it makes it really hard for me to read his books, despite the fact that some of the sort of like the views on society and are so on point, but it's delivered in such a way that I just can't get my head into. It just drags me out of it. So they are humorous and not comedic.
I beg to differ. That the
Noted.
mother-in-law scene was very comedic in book 2. So
Noted. Noted. Speaking of things that show up in your books, though, Mihir is actually the one that coined this question, so I want to give him credit for it. But it's piqued my interest because it's something I've noticed. Is your books always have a plethora of moons? Okay, there's always some kind of imagery of the moon in your books. It's one of my favorite parts of the War Eternal, actually, is the role that the moons play in that world. And just what's with that? Why do you like moons so much? Because I like them too, but I'm wondering where it comes from.
All I'm saying is every single one of my stories has a different number of moons. I wonder why. Who knows? Maybe one day that'll actually come to fruition. Who knows? I don't know.
Ooh,
for
cryptic.
all the Cosmere fans, for the Brandon Sanderson fans, that's something to worry about as well. Because there's the moons that's been driving me crazy since I've been reading all the books. With 2 moons in War Eternal, there's 5 moons somewhere else. There's 3 moons in a couple of other books. It's I cannot figure it out. That's the worst part. And he will not say anything. So which is why, so now everybody else can join me too in just being crazy about it.
Who knows? Maybe
Listen,
one
I
day it will
love
turn out that
connections
they're
like that.
all
My brain's going
interconnected.
bonkers. My brain's going bonkers with that concept now.
Well, to the readers of Death's Beating Heart, they will notice that there was a line at the end of it about Cyrilleth that, maybe that has something to do with something. I don't know.
I gotta go get my copy and reread that now. Why is it in Japan? I can't go read it right now to double check that.
And Rob, how many moons are there in the God Eaters books?
There are 3 in the God Eater books. There is the Blood Moon, the Caped Moon, and the Bone Moon. And I'm not telling you why.
Damn you.
But if we want to go maybe back to a more macro scale, instead of talking about the micro aspects of your books, you've had a decade out here, and you've had, of course, ups and downs throughout your writing career. But I'm wondering if you could pick one peak and one valley that stick out in your mind. Like, this moment was a big highlight for me, or this moment was, I guess you could say, a low light for me. Are there any particular moments, one of each, that come to your mind over the last decade?
For the Valley, it would definitely be, I think it was 2017. It was just after I split with the indie publisher that I'd been kind of. And at that point, I had no books on sale because there was the exclusivity clause where basically I got the rights back, but I couldn't republish them for 6 months. So at that time, I had no books for sale, and I was just, I was sort of like kicking my heels. I had no money coming in because of it. They hadn't paid me for, I think, close to a year. So I'd had no royalties, no money coming in for almost a year. And I was literally the starving artist. I was being supported by my wife, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife. So that was a really bad time for me. I was in a really bad place, sort of emotionally and sort of mentally, and that certainly made itself evident in the books that I was writing at the time. That's why the first time I tried to write The Lessons Never Learned, it was an absolute mess. It was a terrible book because I was in a really bad headspace for trying to write it, basically, which is why I then had to scrap that entire book and rewrite it all over again. Which, don't do that. That's horrible, having to rewrite an entire book. And for my peak, I would definitely say it was in 2020 when releasing The War Eternal, because while I'd had some critical acclaim with things like releasing Never Die and Where Loyalties Lie winning Spiffbo, The War Eternal was the first time where not only did it get some really nice critical acclaim, but it also sold like hotcakes, which was absolutely wonderful, and it allowed me to stop thinking that I was a failure and that I was going to have to go back and get a real job, and I could actually continue doing this.
Not a real job. You have a real job. But I have so many comments off of that. But I'm going to tease y'all and tell you that this is actually part 1 of the HAYES interview. And part 2 is going to be over on Chelsea's channel. So we are going to save our reactions and follow-up questions to that wonderful answer for part 2. So I will have that linked down below. You can go directly there to continue the conversation. But I just want to say thank you for watching part 1. We really appreciate you being here, and hopefully you'll hop on over to see part 2. We'll talk to you guys soon.